So it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy Note 4 and see how this specific phone holds up in 2023. Now, I would definitely tell you this is not a phone I would recommend buying anymore, and I think a majority of people probably know that. This is a phone that's already kind of been outdated for the most part, but it's still super cool that when you actually take a look at this type of phone in this day and age, the fact that this phone was able to bring so much capability during its lifespan, and it was already a pretty big successor coming from its previous phone, which was already a pretty big successor, makes this phone a pretty decent phone in terms of like a historical sense. But like I said, I don't think I would recommend anybody buying these types of phones anymore, considering that they've been outdated for many, many years. However, there are definitely some phones I would recommend buying this year. If you want to pick them up, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy Note 4, on the front, we had a massive 5.7-inch Super AMOLED display. Now, this was, as you probably have guessed it, a massive display during that moment, but I think most of you probably know that 5.7 inches in this day and age is not really that big of a display size anymore, and it's kind of crazy because when you think about it, this was one of the biggest phones you could buy during that day and age. But I guess, we just get better and better phones, and the fact that we have way less bezel on phones nowadays, it kind of makes sense. So if you look at the top, we had the Samsung logo, we had like a big bezel at the very top. And at the bottom, we basically had the home button, we had the capacitive keys as well. And that was honestly some pretty crazy stuff to have on a device like this, because it was a fairly, different, it was a similar design to the Note 3, but there were some little tiny changes. I feel like there was a little bit tiny less bezel on this specific phone, but also there was, the 1440p display that you were getting on this phone as well. So I think Samsung did a tremendous job for the most part with this panel, and having that type of 1440p display was awesome, and I was so happy to see that type of feature set come on this specific device. Now, that's not all. We also have on the bottom a micro USB port, which is also super crazy because, we have like USB-C now, and micro USB is not that great, but it's still a nice thing to have, I guess, for that day and age. We also, on top of that, had a, S Pen, which was also super cool. So we could go ahead and basically utilize that S Pen whichever way we wanted. And it was basically like a stylus kind of thing. And that kind of stuff is really cool. That stylus, you probably already know this, but having that type of capability was so awesome. And when Samsung debuted it on like 3 or 4 phones before this one, it was a really cool thing. And it's still a super nice thing to have on here too. So that's another really awesome thing you have going for with the Galaxy Note 4 too. On top of that, you also have a headphone jack as well. So I will tell you, probably a majority of people are probably past the headphone jack talk now, but it was still a super nice thing to have. And even now, it's still very nice to have. If you want to have a phone that has a headphone jack, well, you definitely are getting that type of capability on this type of device, which is still super awesome. On top of that, on the back of this phone, you are getting a full-on plastic back. So this was the generation right before Samsung started bringing glass backs and super premium feeling stuff to their next generation. So this was a really nice thing because we were able to go ahead and basically remove that back if we wanted to. Yeah, it wasn't a plastic back, and yeah, it wasn't the most premium feeling thing in the world, but it was still very nice to have a very somewhat premium device and still have a beautiful display and everything, and be able to remove that back, which would allow you to basically remove that battery. It allows you to expand that storage as well, so you could put in a micro SD card slot right there as well. And those types of things are things we're probably never going to get back on any of our phones. And it's so insane because when we look back at it, it's going to be one of those things where we look back at this specific phone and reminisce on the good old days, just like how I'm doing now. And we're going to probably feel the same exact way when they remove the charging port, when they remove some other things too. So I definitely look at the Note 4 in this day and age, and I'm very, very happy with the way Samsung approached it. It's not a perfect phone, but I think, Samsung did a pretty good job on the outside. Now, we do have the camera setup on this specific phone as well. And in that day and age in 2014, when this phone came out, this was a really good camera. It had a 16 megapixel wide angle or standard camera on the back, and it had a 3.7 megapixel camera on the front. I still don't know why they chose to do those like random types of, numbers and sensors, but I still think with the Galaxy Note 4's camera, it's not bad. For what it brought at that time, it definitely was not a bad camera at all. It was basically competing with the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus, and those types of cameras, were good for the time. But the Note 4, although it did bring, more megapixels, it did bring 4K at 30, which you didn't really have on any iPhone during that moment. But also, you were getting a lot of features built in to that Samsung camera. So that's still something that's super up there. That's a very, very cool feature that you're getting. And again, that kind of stuff you're not really getting on other phones for the most part at that day and age, back then. So I still look at a phone like the Samsung Galaxy Note 4, and it's not a perfect camera. It's not a camera I would recommend people to use anymore, but it's still a nice thing that they did, and I'm still a huge fan of the way Samsung approached that specific lens. So that kind of covers it up there as well. Now moving on to the software and the longevity portion, you probably have guessed it, but this phone has been outdated with software for many, many years. So it makes very little sense to go and buy a phone like this at all. And that's just something that happens. When you're getting a phone like the Samsung Galaxy Note 4, it makes zero sense at all to buy a phone like this because it's been outdated with software. And better yet, it ended with like TouchWiz. And TouchWiz was notorious of not being that great of a version of software. And that's pretty much what's going on here too. So in this specific point with the software, if you're able to custom ROM it, which I think you were able to custom ROM some models of the Note 4, then maybe you're going to be okay. But probably for a vast majority of people, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to buy a phone like the Samsung Galaxy Note 4 because it's already been outdated with software for so many versions, so many versions of software basically. So that kind of covers up there as well. Now moving on to basically the performance of this phone. Internally, it had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 805 chipset inside with 3 gigabytes of RAM. So this is another classic case where a phone, basically like the Note 4, had a pretty good performing chipset during that day and age, but this is a 9-year-old phone, so it's not really going to be that fast. But also, this phone was basically just mauled over with TouchWiz, the software version of the skin version of Android that it had. It was a very, very skin version, and that was a turnoff for a lot of people, including myself. I liked stock Android during this moment, and that's why phones like the Nexuses and the Pixels of like 2 years later of the specific phone, they've always felt a little bit better and better, just smoother in general, because they didn't have a lot of this bogged down software. And that's essentially what was going on with this specific device too. So I will say during that day and age, a lot of people were hyping up this phone because it was like the fastest phone of all time, and they were probably right. But definitely these phones don't age as well. I could pick up an iPhone 6 Plus, and although that phone was excruciatingly slow to use as well, I feel like that would give me a way better experience and just a faster phone overall than something like the Galaxy Note 4. And that's exactly what's going on here. So in my opinion, the performance side really wouldn't be the reason I would pick up this phone if I'm being honest. And that kind of leads into the battery life as well. It had a 3,220 mAh battery, which is a big size battery to have on a device like this. So that kind of stuff is really cool as well. And again, it makes me a really big fan when you're getting a phone like the Note 4 that you can go ahead and just expand the battery and just, change it if you want to. But like I said, I wouldn't recommend anybody buying it, which leads me to the question, is this phone still worth buying? And the answer, as you may have guessed it, is no. I don't think this phone is worth buying pretty much in any capacity. It makes a lot more sense to go ahead and buy a phone like a Samsung Galaxy S21, an S20, an S21 FE, Galaxy S22, a Pixel 7, a Pixel 6a, a Google Pixel 6, even a Pixel 5. Those phones are going to be giving you a much better experience than this one, and it doesn't really make any sense to buy a phone like the Galaxy Note 4 when so many better phones pretty much exist. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.